Alright everyone, I thought it was time for another video about how Bernie Sanders doesn't fucking understand what he's talking about. And a lot of his fans don't either, and I'm noticing some shilling and some inauthentic behavior. Like the other day, I think I'm a Vermonter, and I've got a reasonably large audience. In fact, I've probably got I'm definitely in the top 10 Vermonters as far as my reach, nationally or internationally. Guaranteed I'm in that group. And even though that's not saying a huge amount because there aren't that many Vermonters, I think that I piss people off a little bit more than average when I go after Bernie Sanders because I'm one of his constituents, because I know what I'm talking about. I've lived in Vermont most of my life. And so people on the left, they get more hot under the collar when I address the issue, which is why I want to do it more and more. And anyway, the other day, I guess probably some Reddit shills decided to make the rounds, and they had one of their breadtube friends who's known for clickbait actually make a video about me, and I'm not going to name drop them. I'm not going to post it here because that's the whole point. They want to get attention. That's not going to happen, but I thought it was funny, when a person opens out by saying, I don't watch this person's material, but I think that they're cringy and wrong. Well, then you just fucking shot your own argument in the foot, dude. It's just not going to happen. Cry me a river, by the way, people in the comments. If you think that addressing my personal appearance bothers me, I've had quite a few numbers of years now to change my personal appearance. I don't really care about others' opinion. It's even funnier, though. This takes the cake. When people think that I'm concerned about Bernie Sanders. I'm not. I'll tell you why. Here's it in a nutshell. Here's the Democrats' problem. And when people on the left ignore this, I am not a conservative. I am not a Republican. And I'm not a Trump superfan. I have spent several years trying to warn the Democrats of their own fucking demise. And instead I get called a fanatic or people assume that I'm arguing in bad faith. Here's the problem for the Dems. And it's been a problem for years. The Democratic Party has been dragged further and further and further to the left. Partially because of Democratic in-party obstruction, their inability to deal with Boehner really shot them in the foot with regards to their further left and younger constituents. Those people started moving to the left and dragging the party along with them by half steps, to the point where Bernie Sanders, who was considered a significantly fanatic outsider in 2016, is all of a sudden embraced as the best possibility to beat Trump. I disagree totally. Buttigieg or one of these moderates would fare better. I don't think that they would win because we've got a good economy going right now. Incumbents have a huge advantage anyway. Trump has a 90% chance of getting reelected. Go ahead and fucking admit it. Just admit it to yourself if you're on the left. You're probably going to see a second-term Trump because your field sucks. Bernie Sanders is now seen as electable. He's seen as sane. The problem is this. The Democrats have been so busy looking at what they believe that they've extrapolated that to be what they think the nation believes. But the Democrats have gone so far to the left, they've alienated virtually every possible independent voter in the country. When Trump just gave his State of the Union a few days ago, this is a perfect microcosm of what I'm talking about before I get into Bernie Sanders' economic illiteracy specifically. Trump gives the State of the Union. What he says ultimately doesn't matter. It's how it's perceived by the population. 89% of independents supported the State of the Union and liked it. Nancy Pelosi immediately responds by tearing it up. The optics couldn't be more sheer. The optics could not be more telling. She and other Democrats have come to believe that that sort of behavior is normal and acceptable and within the Overton window. But it's only acceptable and within the Overton window within the Democratic core. The Democratic core, though, isn't what it was 4 or 5 years ago when it overlapped with centrism. Now it doesn't. Now it overlaps with commies and socialists. I'm seeing people who have Karl Marx avatars and hammer and sickle Twitter handles talking about how wonderful the Democrats are becoming. The fact is that the lack of self-awareness among Democrats is going to toss them off a cliff. And people who are part of that sort of side of liberalism, they don't see a problem with Bernie Sanders' plans, but he can't enact them anyway. Now I'm going to talk about how illiterate he is on these issues. Number one is simply how he's going to pay for things. He can't explain how. If he points out an individual program he wants, well, Medicaid for all, or universal pre-K, universal student loan debt forgiveness, he can explain to you how he's going to pay for these things by taxing billionaires. Now, first and foremost, billionaire doesn't mean makes $1 billion a year. Billionaire often means rich on paper. When Sanders professes that he wants to enact all of these policies and go after this one chunk of society to pay for 99% of it, what he's essentially saying is that he wishes to liquidate most of the productive wealth of the upper echelons of society and nationalize it, or redistribute it to other people. Who's going to buy it up? Well, the private marketplace isn't going to be able to compensate because you're flooding the market with all of this real estate and all of this productive capacity. The government's going to have to take it over. It's probably the whole point. It's a socialist takeover. See, the problem is that would strangulate the economy completely and collapse it. What would end up happening is that people would eventually reject this far leftism, kick him back out of office. He might not even last his first term due to health problems alone. And then they would probably elect a regime that actually was far right. If you think Trump is far right, you're wrong. He's a Manhattan socialite. He was a lifelong business dem. He's a moderate. Trump is a moderate. The idea that he's fanatic has always been complete bullshit. The fact that he mouths off with bravado on Twitter doesn't make him a fanatic. It makes him interesting. It's part of his persona. You can say he's off kilter now. Dude, you're talking about electing a dude who's pushing 80 years old and professing a mid-1800s ideology. So first, he can't really formulate how he's going to pay for them on the surface. Secondly, what about the deeper economic fallout? When you're talking about eliminating the private option within Medicare, for example, as far as I know, no other candidate is stressing that that would happen. Bernie Sanders is even talking down to unions, which tend to be heavily Democratic, by the way. And it seems like the far leftists don't see this as a potential strategic problem. Oh yeah, Bernie Sanders is telling several million union members, fuck your negotiated healthcare system. We're going to give you whatever Uncle Sam wants to give you. Don't you think this might piss off the average American worker who's in a union? Don't you think some of those union bosses might say, well, the Trump economy is helping our business and he's really taking off a hands-off approach with regards to union negotiations, or we can elect the dude that wants to eliminate our negotiating capabilities on half a dozen issues. I think that some of them might end up endorsing Trump in a general. I think he might end up getting union endorsements. Oh, yeah, that'd go over well, by the way, for Bernie in the Rust Belt. And those are average workers. Working in middle class. We're not talking about the millionaire union boss or the CEO. We're talking about the on-the-ground union members at that point revolting, potentially even going against their union if it doesn't endorse him. Then, of course, you get the possibility the Dem candidate's going to be fucking Michael Bloomberg. By the way, why is it that so many people, many of which I have a feeling aren't really Democrats, they're just leftist ideologues trying to usurp the party, and I think some of them are paid by Jenks people. I speculate that it's similar to when they were paying for AOC and some of these other actors. I think they've begun astroturfing the internet a little bit with some of their extra Soros cash. Just a hunch here. I'm sure that it'll be evidenced in time. Don't you think that if Bernie Sanders were elected, and he were to try to impose these plans, don't you think that the Democrats, too, would stand in his way? I mean, they've made it clear they don't even want him to be nominee. There are a significant number of Democrats looking at it just from the party perspective, and I'm not a fan of the existence of political parties. I've never been a member of one. I voted Obama in 2008. I voted Ron Paul in 2012 because Mitt Romney, fuck him. Voted for Trump last time and presumably will now. Look at it from this situation. Let's say that your main goal is to get Democrats elected. You're a partyist. It's not really ideological for you. To some degree, it's just strategic. Do you want the party to become socialist and drag your party's Overton window even further left when you're already alienating people within parts of the country that are only center left? This is going to be a big problem, and if you nominate Bernie Sanders, I can guarantee it's going to hurt you down ballot. You're going to lose the House of Representatives almost certainly. Virtually all of those Democrats who are vulnerable get voted out. And then Sanders, at the very least, for 2 years, would be a lame duck. He wouldn't accomplish anything, and because his fans are asking for literal revolution, so far as you can throw it, it's ice cream socialism anyway, he's not going to be able to deliver shit. The idea that he's a revolutionary anyway has always been fake. He's been in office in the legislature for now 30 years. What has he accomplished? Has socialism sprung into existence? Has welfare inclined because of his own personal efforts? What about my home state of Vermont? Where's our socialism? We had a comprehensive study years ago which Jonathan Gruber, the ACA architect, ended up embezzling $500,000 from our state and settling out of court, by the way. He was hired by Shumlin, who is a far-left governor. He's certainly beyond the average liberal. He's far left. Tax and spend on steroids. Shumlin spends $1 million, gets Gruber, gets a commission together. They spend like 6 or 7 months studying this, seeing if you can do universal health care in the state of Vermont. They deem it incapable of being implemented because they would have had to have raised the tax rate so much there wouldn't be a fucking person left in the state. Instead, we have essentially a public option within the state of Vermont. We have sort of a hybrid system. Sanders even wants to eliminate that. State exchanges, you're not allowed to have those. There won't be any competition at all. There will be one-size-fits-all health care for every person. Except, I'm sure, for Congress and politicians and some of the bureaucratic elites. They'll have access to whatever they want. And when rationing comes along through, you can guarantee that people that are at the top echelons of society will be the ones getting the preferential health care. Because that's always what happens. And it happens in other countries too. I love it when he puts out these lists of countries with universal health care and then leaves North Korea off of them. Wonderful. You know, again, provide a comprehensive list so that you can brag about China and North Korea and Turkmenistan and how wonderful their healthcare systems are, Bernie. Anyway, the idea that Bernie Sanders has ever really accomplished anything, people are taken in by his revolution shtick. I'm not. He's been in politics since the 70s, dude. He was mayor of Burlington for years. He was in the legislature for years. He has mostly, by the way, legislative experience. It's been a long time since he was mayor of Burlington. Again, here's the other problem. People are saying that he's palatable to a general audience. Yes, if you tell people that you want to give them free shit, that's a winning strategy. But if somebody else is going to come along and tell them, hey, it's not free, he's going to tax you and then give you part of that money back to you, that falls short. I would point out that Bernie Sanders has never yet won an election outside of a far-left sort of a district. Either Vermont at large, in the case of his legislative career, or Burlington in the case of his mayorship there for several terms. He's never won among average Americans or even average Vermonters. Really, when you think about it, Vermont's kind of tilts to the left. It's sort of like saying, oh, I was mayor of San Francisco for 4 terms. I'm qualified to lead Wyoming. That's not the way that it works, and I just don't see him winning. I think if he ends up being nominated, it'll be a wash, and he'll lose in a spectacular fashion. People will reject socialism, and he will be under the term socialism. The idea that you'll be able to lie to people and say, well, he's not a real socialist, he's a social democrat, too late. He's spent 50 years calling himself a socialist. And saying, well, yeah, he calls himself that, but it's not really real. I'm going to take it from Bernie Sanders' own mouth, thanks, instead of one of his fans who's clearly gaslighting to try to get him elected because they're intelligent enough to realize that the term socialism drags you down in the United States. I think Sanders would lose states that have gone blue for 4 or 5 cycles quite easily. I think that he would be soundly rejected. I don't think he would win at all. His age and health problems alone, in a normal election, the fact that he's pushing 80 would already be a disqualifier. The Democrats seem keen on committing political suicide for the cycle. Let him do so. How sad. That means Trump is effectively running unopposed. That's about all. Peace out.